Welcome to another episode of the Idaho House Republicans podcast. Thank you for joining us. This podcast is so that you can get to learn a little bit more about the representatives that you have sent to the State House. And today we're very grateful to spend some time with Representative John Schertz, and he represents Legislative District 9, Seat A. And he is in his first term. Let me tell you a little bit about John.
Yeah.
John is a fifth-generation Idahoan. He is raised on a working ranch in Washington County. He went to Weiser High School. You went to the University of Idaho, and you went to the University of Colorado Law School. But you also went to Harvard University's Extension School under the GI Bill, which is really cool. You are a U.S. Air Force JAG officer, which means Judge Advocate General Corps.
Right?
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you were appointed as an assistant U.S. attorney under President Trump's first term.
Yep.
So you're a pretty important guy. Glad to have you.
No.
Glad to have you on our show. And let's just talk first, Representative Schertz. You represent Legislative District 9.
Right.
Tell us about Legislative District 9, rural, urban, bedroom communities, and what do they care about in Legislative District 9?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. District 9 is a great district. We have Washington, Payette, and I kind of have the western half of Canyon County, and it's a rural district. Some of the best farm ground in the state. Anything can be grown there, from our seeds to large cattle ranches and sheep farms and everything in between, onions. And the people out there, they're working class people, right? They're Trump folks. They are the reason that Trump won around the country.
Right.
Those working class, good, honest voters. They're just conservative people that want to see a change in the country. And I'm proud to represent them. My family's been there since the 1880s. And so it's really...
So pre-statehood.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Yep, exactly. 2 years before statehood, my family homesteaded there. And so it's just an honor. I mean, I was, before I came in here, we're sitting here in the Capitol, and I was looking out on the floor and just thinking about how much of an honor it is to really represent people I think that are my people here in the State House. So it's been a fun ride here as we get into our second term.
Amen, brother. Tell us about the committees that you sit on.
Yeah. So I just got moved up to be the vice chairman of Ag, which is a really cool responsibility. I was on that committee last year, and the speaker made me vice chairman, and that's a fantastic place for my constituents' voices to be heard.
Right.
I sit on Judiciary and Rules, so that kind of fits a lot in my background,
Right.
The prosecution background. We hear a lot of different bills regarding our police and avenue that I actually know a decent amount about. Here,
Right.
I mean, it's hard to know everything, right? So it's good to find those areas where you know stuff about. And then I sit on a Rev and Tax Committee, which I'm sure if you've been paying attention to the news, the conformity to the Big Beautiful Bill has been a big issue that we've tackled this session. So it's a really good mix of committees.
You were right in the middle of it all.
Yep,
Let's put it that way. So let's talk about some of the bills that have come through Ag, Judicial and Rules, Rev and Tax. And if I forget anything, let me know.
Yeah.
So with revenue and taxation, obviously there's been the conformity bill. There has been obviously the revenue number that the governor and the House has to agree to. And then how does the Revenue and Tax Committee then fit into that whole process? The governor gives a budget, you guys pick a number, you have this conformity bill. And then how do you play into all of that?
For us, we're focused just on taxation and what revenue is coming into the state. Our folks on the JFAC Committee, Joint Appropriations Committee, are focused on where the money is going to be allocated and making sure it's in the right spot. When we're setting policy, on our side, we're just focused on revenue, right? And for us on the House, Republicans have really been on a focus on trying to make sure that we get as much money back in the pockets of Idahoans that we can. And so that's why you've seen a lot of tax cuts this cycle. We had the Big Beautiful Bill, right? You have no tax on tips, no tax on overtime.
Right.
You can now deduct your car and your car payments and a lot of
if
other
you buy
things.
a U.S. car.
Right. Yep, exactly. And then you have your standard deduction too. All of that comes back down to us. We have to conform with what the federal government's doing each and every year. And those are great tax cuts. I mean, that's what the people voted for. But that costs another $150 million in revenue.
Right.
As it should, right? It's going to be back in the hands of working people. Who do you think that no tax on overtime, no tax on tips really benefits? It's those working class voters that sent me here. And so I was proud to support those tax cuts and giving that money back to our folks, even here on the state level. So I think as people think, oh, well, the feds are cutting it, but we take that tax cut too. And so we're able to make sure that's beneficial, not just on the federal tax return, but on your state tax return too.
And the House and the Senate passed a conformity bill where they conform with the BBB. There's some exceptions, but the estimate is it's $155 million of revenue, as you said, back to the taxpayers from the federal bill, Big Beautiful Bill. in this year and about $175 million next year.
Right.
So that's a tax cut, but it wasn't one that was originated by the House.
Right.
And we know that the Speaker of the House is particularly fond of tax cuts and has driven almost $6 billion of
Yeah.
tax cuts in the last 5 years. Just amazing. And Idaho is one of the lowest tax burdens overall of all the states.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, is there a chance for continuing tax cuts driven by the state of Idaho?
Everyone would like to keep the tax burden as low as possible, right? I think that's it. How that looks like, we're still looking at the revenue numbers, right? We have to make sure our schools are funded too. That's a priority for us. We have rural schools, and we can't be cutting, balancing the budget on the backs of kids. And so I think when you look at the whole picture, that's what really drives a lot of those decisions. But we were proud to be able to incorporate those one big, beautiful bill tax cuts. And we did, I think, $450 million last year. But it's interesting when you mentioned the burden. So my district, it's a border district. We can see, I was at a friend's house the other day, and from his balcony, you can see over into Oregon, and you can see the policies that are not working,
Right,
quite literally. And you
Right.
go across the border in Ontario, right on the Oregon side, and you see the drugs, and you see a higher crime rate, and you see a bloated budget, and you see a state that their tax burden is at least 2 times, maybe close to 3 times, depending on how you figure it out, of ours. And do you think Oregon's in a better position than us? Of course not, right?
Right.
And so I think we have to make sure that we're doing the right things and funding the things we need to fund. But ultimately, finding that sweet spot is what we're getting to and still working towards. But the more money we can get back in the hands of Idahoans without harming our schools and things like that is a place where we want to be. So that's when I think about it. It's that sweet spot. And we've been able to decrease our tax burden, which has been fantastic. And we have growth in our state, right? I know that's
Right.
kind of an unpopular thing, but there's a driver of that drives more revenue too, that allows us to give some more tax breaks back to folks.
So what would you say is the most important bill that you've seen in the Ag Committee this year?
On the ag side. Well, I'm working, I guess I can pick my own bill.
Why not?
I'm working on
It's your show.
an aerial predator bill. So wolves are a big problem for our ag producers. There's currently in our rules the ability for our producers to get a permit to actually go and use a helicopter, a plane, or something of that nature to actually
Wow.
go and make sure the predators aren't harming their livestock. I have a bill to actually move that into statute. We were trying to get out of the situation where the administrative state is handling a lot of these issues. Move into statute where we have more control. So our long term, our farmers and ranchers can rely on that program if they have a really bad wolf problem. Even on, for my uncle, he had wolves get into our sheep and just decimate them,
Right.
kill over 100 head of sheep and just kill them for sport, right?
Right.
You have to be able to manage those wolves. And they're forced upon us by the federal government. And we're at a point where we can manage them, but if you can't actively get to them, that's why the aerial program is so important. So I think in the Ag Committee, getting that into statute allows us to have a little more control over it and not have the administrative state handle it on the rules side, which I think is important. The more rules we can get in statute, the better, because it gives the people, our bureaucrats, they aren't accountable to the people like we are. It gives us here in the legislature who are accountable to our farmers.
More direct route.
Yep, exactly.
So do you also deal with water issues? Does
Yeah.
that come through your?
Yeah,
committee?
it
Whose
comes through
committee?
resources.
Resources.
We see it on the floor. I was proud to support the $30 million ongoing last year. That'll be continuing to make sure our water infrastructure is maintained,
Right.
because water is such a precious resource. In my area too, obviously on the eastern Snake Plain, but it all flows down right through where we are. So it has an impact on a wide variety of things. It has an impact on the dams. It has an impact on farmers growing crops. Obviously has an impact on the folks that are actually taking the water. You think of Fruitland. I toured their water plant a couple weeks ago, and they're pulling it right out of the Payette River. That's where their water comes from to be able to treat it. So there's so much impact on water you don't even think of. And the more
Right.
we can invest in the infrastructure, save stuff, save
Right.
water,
Charge the
Yep,
aquifer.
exactly.
Yep.
Is really, really important. We have an eye on that. I was glad we were able to get that done last year.
So now let's turn a little bit to the Judicial and Rules
Yep.
Committee. A couple of things that caught my eye is there was a bill introduced recently which deals with maliciously and willfully disrupting religious worship.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Your thoughts on
problem.
that? Yeah, what your thoughts on that?
That's a problem. We saw what happened in Minnesota,
Yeah,
right? Where
yes.
people are actively going in to a church service, a place of worship that is very sacred,
Unprotected, right?
unprotected, right? And that place is very sacred to me, sacred to a lot of our constituents, and causing a disruption for political gain or advantage. And that should be a disturbance of peace, and having it in the statute, right? Actually having that specifically labeled. I think make sure there's no ambiguity, that you can't go into a church service and start causing a disruption. And we're seeing more and more across the country. People, unfortunately, on the left are more hostile towards organized religion. I mean, it's a big problem. It's unfortunate that there's a divide there. You think that people would just respect religion and respect places of worship and people
Right.
doing that activity in our communities. It's tremendously important. We cannot allow folks to go in there, disrupt it for their own political gain and film it and not be able to actually go after us. I think that's a really good bill that we're bringing forward.
Another one that caught my eye, especially with your background
Mhm.
being in the military, House Bill 602, which deals with foreign laws,
Yep. Yeah.
kind of superseding Idaho law or local law.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that and why you think it's the appropriate time to deal with that issue
Yeah,
in this year's legislature.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this is around the Sharia law. I think that's part of the push, but it expands beyond that. Whether you have UN or other different international tribunals trying to
World Health Organization.
Yep, exactly. I mean, there's so many of them. And I think just clarifying that they will never be able to be above our law, our own sovereignty is important because you never know. You never know what kind of, judge you get out there that all of a sudden is persuaded by something. I think the more we can clarify these issues, the better, get ahead of them before it becomes a problem because if you cede a bit of sovereignty, they'll take it if they can. And that's the concern, I think, with those. I think that's a good bill. We're trying to take back some of that, make sure that any foreign law is not going to interfere with anything we're doing here in Idaho.
So, Representative Schertz, you've been front and center at one of the more difficult bills that actually got across the line in the House by one vote, and that was House Concurrent Resolution 25. Tell people what House Concurrent Resolution 25 was all about and why you felt motivated to bring it to the House.
House Concurrent Resolution 25 is a balanced budget amendment. And so it is us as the states using the U.S. Constitution to force Congress to actually pass through a balanced budget amendment, which would then be sent back to our states to be ratified. The federal government's out of control. We have $38.5 trillion in debt. Every year we stack another $2 trillion onto that. And over 20% of our budget each and every year is going to interest payments on our debt. It's hard to imagine that. You think it's just like a household consumer, right? If you were paying 20% of your own money each and every year just to cover your debt, it's not going to take too long until you're bankrupt. And what does that amount? When does that actually hit?
Right.
Where we no longer have solvency as a country. And so I think it's incumbent upon us as a states. We got it through the House. It's going to be heard in the Senate. If the Senate passes it, we'll be the 29th state to pass that resolution and tell Congress and effectively force them to draft a balanced budget amendment for the U.S. Constitution, send it back to us for ratification.
As of this morning, the debt was $38.7 trillion. And I think
it's probably grown since we passed.
I know, it's sadly. I believe that when you gave some testimony on the floor, you were saying it's akin to making $85,000 but spending $300,000.
We have a $5.3 trillion budget every year, right? And so it's akin to making $53,000 and having $387,000 in credit card debt just sitting there. And when you actually think about it in those terms, you're like, there's no way. I mean, what does this look like for our children and our grandchildren? We're essentially passing this burden on to them. I feel like there's finally getting some momentum back. Reagan was a big proponent of this.
Yes.
Governor DeSantis came and he's a big proponent of it as well.
Many of the Trump cabinet.
Yep, the Trump cabinet, Marco Rubio. And
a lot of the governors, the Republican governors.
Yep, exactly. Are big proponents of it for a reason, but it's incumbent upon us as states. We have an obligation to hold the federal government accountable. I mean, and we're not just out here just to be another political entity underneath the federal government. We are a sovereign in and of ourselves. That is the way the Constitution has been set up under federalism. It's a beautiful thing. I think we need to start acting like it a little more. Right? We can't just throw our hands in the wind and say it'll never change. I'm just not that type of person. I think we have to be proactive, and we have to be able to say, hey, you're out of control, and the federal government needs to rein in. I think this is a good way to do it.
Now, when Governor DeSantis came to the State House a few weeks ago, he echoed one of the arguments that you made the other day on the floor, and that is at a certain point of a certain number of states that actually ratify this, as it gets closer to the 34, which would trigger
the
convention. When you kind of crawl up near 33, at some point Congress is saying, well, we can handle it or we're going to let those guys
Yeah,
handle it. So
exactly.
we might as well step in. We see where this is going, and we might as well solve it as opposed to letting this process handle it. So
Right.
that was one of the arguments you made that this legislation is more to force the hand of Congress
Correct.
rather than calling for the Article 5 convention.
Correct.
So talk
Correct.
about that.
Yeah, we have no intention, because what happens in these situations, a lot of convention calls have resulted in Congress actually proposing the amendment themselves, women's suffrage or a whole other avenues of calls, because ultimately, if you get to 34 states, they are ceding all of that ability to write the amendment themselves to the states, and they're never going to do that. They're not
Right.
going to allow, and just like us, we wouldn't allow somebody to come in and propose other things for us. We're going to get to 33 states. They're going to get the picture. We aren't going to go through the whole process of the convention, and they're going to draft it. Because they don't want to cede that language authority. And there'll be negotiations just like there is in anything else. But then you skip all that process of going through it, and you make sure there aren't anything, because there are people who have fears about something bad coming out of it. You don't have to deal with that portion of it. And then you get the amendment that you want. It's a single issue, right? Single issue amendment, just focus on a balanced budget.
Right.
And that's why I was really proud to support it. But all of our history has shown there's been a lot of calls, and that's the way to actually get Congress to act. There's really no other way to force their hand except for the states leaning in under the U.S. Constitution.
So tell people, what does it mean? What is Article 5? What does it do?
Yeah, Article 5 under the U.S. Constitution allows the states to push an amendment call up. If it gets to 34 states, the states would come together and write that call. How it's traditionally been used, it's never gotten to that point, because at the 32, 33 mark, Congress gets the picture and they want to keep
Time
control.
to move.
Yep,
right.
time to move, and they do, and they always do. So the whole intention of this is not to actually go through that constitutional convention. It's to force Congress's hand, which has been, as Governor Reagan, who got to 32 states before he got into office when he was governor, that was a traditional way to do it. And I think it's a smart way to actually get something like this accomplished. Because if not, Congress really has no incentive to balance the budget. Because they want to go back there, they feed the bills full of pork, and they get reelected. And frankly, they're not going to be there.
Hard decisions are not made like we have to make, like this year's budget.
Maybe we have to balance it.
And it's expected to be lower than the previous year's budget.
Yeah.
So that's how we have to do things in Idaho, because it's constitutionally
required.
Yeah. Now, Idaho obviously has had a role in the balanced budget for, I think it's over 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
We had a balanced budget amendment. Then that was rescinded, I believe, in the early 2000s. Senator Larry Craig kind of carried that bill in the Senate when it lost by one vote.
Yeah.
So Idaho has had a little bit of history with this.
Yeah. And that's why I think it's proud for us. And it happened to be Reagan's birthday on February the 6th when we passed it on the House floor, which I thought was neat, because Reagan was actually here in Idaho coming for this bill when he was governor. But Idaho has played a role, and I'm glad we can put that role into force and do it. Because you think about that. If Congress had done what they should have done, and we hadn't lost by one vote when Larry Craig was in office, think of the financial situation we'd be in now. And it's so sad. And it's all for naught. You think that 20% in interest payments, that we're spending each and every year just on interest, what could we be spending that on? Obviously, a lot of it would probably go to tax relief for our citizens. And so I think that's the loss. When you get your debt gets so big, it harms you. And that's my big worry. It's going to really, really decrease our status in the world, our national security. And then you're going to have China fill that void. And that's just something we just can't sit by and let happen.
Now, do you remember what your closing line was on the floor on Reagan's birthday?
I can't remember what it was.
I think it was something like, give one for the Gipper.
Yeah, it was good.
Anyway, so South Carolina, I believe, became the 28th state this year. And so Idaho is trying to become the 20th state. And there's a couple of states that they're working hard this year.
Kentucky and Montana. Yep.
If that happened, it would be at 31.
31, yeah. Okay. Really close.
So let's talk about, there's a lot of criticism, obviously, and it mostly centers on a runaway convention.
Right.
What is a runaway convention, and why were you personally comfortable that is unlikely to occur?
There are some folks that feel like, hey, if you actually go to a convention, even with a single issue, that somehow there'll be a whole bunch of other things that are going to be proposed, right? But for us who are just using it to force Congress to act, if we're not going to actually get to a convention, obviously that's not going to be a concern. But even if you got to a convention, the history on them, every state gets a vote. Obviously, we have more Republican states than Democrat states. And then what happens 38 states have to ratify whatever comes out of a convention. So there's multiple safety mechanisms built within the Constitution. And as a lover of the Constitution and think it was divinely inspired, you can't say all the Constitution was divinely inspired except for that one part, right? You think about it from a biblical perspective. You don't
Right.
get to pick and choose
Right.
what you
Which
think is
parts of the
right.
Bible,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. You don't get to pick and choose.
Right.
And so I believe the founders put this in there for a reason. If they didn't put it in there, and if it wasn't divinely inspired, then I have trouble following that argument from good friends who love the Constitution as much as I do. I think the bottom line for me was we're not seeking to actually go through the whole convention process.
Right.
We're seeking to use it as a tool, which has worked in the past, and to force Congress to act.
Well, when Governor DeSantis was here,
Mhm.
Representative Church will probably remember that he discussed one of the ways Florida would discourage somebody if it went to the convention is that Florida has criminal penalties if you kind of go off the rails or
Yeah.
decide you want to do something different, and the right to recall
Yeah,
you as a
yep,
delegate. And 15 states apparently have
done that.
criminal penalties.
Yeah,
Should that occur? So that's another element that, of course, could be
be done.
added to this.
Yeah, and we could always
this
recall our
cause.
folks. I think because our push is centered on not going through the whole convention process, that's why we didn't bring those other tools. I think there are different other groups that are trying to push for the actual convention.
Mhm.
I think that's the conversation in that realm.
But the great thing is that in Idaho, on the floor, we have a debate, we take a vote, and then we accept the majority.
Yep.
But the minority made extremely powerful and good arguments on their side. The winning side listened to the other side, and the other side listened to the other side. And then we really appreciate all the voices of the caucus
Yeah,
because
exactly.
there's a lot of people that are well-intentioned on both sides that are passionately believe.
Good folks, right?
Yes.
Who love the Constitution
Some
as much as I
believed
do.
completely with your efforts.
Yep.
Some people didn't agree with
Yeah.
it at all. But that's the great thing about Idaho is that we have
Yeah.
this panoply of views. And from this panoply, we create a nice tapestry. It's a great place to live. It's faith, family, and freedom.
Yeah.
It's low taxation. It's trying to keep the government out of your lives. It's pro Second Amendment,
Yep.
First Amendment.
Pro-life. Yep.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
yep.
pro-life. So I just appreciate that the Republican caucus is able to do all these things, even though you'll see
Yeah.
that there are disagreements
Yeah.
on the floor.
That's the beauty of democracy, right?
Right.
The beauty of our republic is you can have disagreements with people who love the Constitution as much as you do, and you respect them.
They had different concerns about what might
which
happen.
you will acknowledge those, and then you vote, and that's where the will of the people ultimately is. So.
To close with us, our time today, I meant to mention this way earlier in our talk, but you were a first termer. I always like to ask the first termers, why were you called to this? Like,
Yeah.
why did you decide to do this?
I think I felt as someone who came up through public service, right, who was, served in the military. I served as a federal prosecutor under the first Trump administration, and I'm just trying to continue that in a different way,
Mm-hmm.
right? And really felt called to serve an area that has really given so much to me. People that have really given a lot to me, personally, and be able to give back to them. It's truly an honor to represent the people of my district here in the State House. They're just amazing folks, really good faith, family, freedom, good, hardworking, working class people. And it's really been an honor to be able to represent them.
I think that's what we're seeing as we talk to more and more people in this caucus and we present them in the Idaho House Republican podcast, is just how much amazing talent and how everyone is well spoken and has a real passion to do this.
Yeah, we're lucky. We have a lot of good people.
We really do. So Representative John Schertz, who represents Legislative District 9 in Seat A, a fifth-generation Idahoan predating the statehood of Idaho. We just thank you for joining us today on the Idaho House Republicans podcast, and we wish you all the success in the rest of the term. And we thank you for joining us here on the Idaho House Republicans podcast. And as we always say before we sign off, God bless the great state of Idaho, and thank you again, Representative John Schertz.
Thanks so much.
From timber towns to wheat field roads, different roads, but the same old hope. We bow our heads and we stand up tall, answering the people when